Welcome to the Hearts Entwined podcast. In this podcast, we'll be having discussions around the secrets which attract lasting, healthy, fulfilling relationships, creating a healthy mindset, and what women should know and understand about men. Introducing your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts, relationship expert, trainer, speaker, and best-selling author of the Cupid's Bow technique. Lyn's mission is to have a positive impact in reducing divorce, domestic violence, and suicide.
Welcome to the Hearts Entwined podcast. This is your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts. And today, listeners, I've got the really exciting news around getting Perry Power onto my podcast. He's a lovely young man. And Perry is an actor, scriptwriter, and author, but he is literally hot off the press from releasing a new book called Breaking the Silence, which is around his own particular story, which I'll get him to tell you about. So, Perry, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, Lyn, thank you for having me on. Thank you for giving me that warm, pleasant introduction. I'm super pumped to be here, so thank you.
Well, Perry, we've both got harrowing stories relating to our backgrounds, and with my audience, I've shared, how that has impacted my future relationships. But just for the benefit of those that don't actually know or have heard of you, just would you mind sharing your particular story? And then we'll get into a conversation how that has or hasn't impacted your relationships going forward.
Sure. So in regards to sexual abuse, I was abused for about a year and a half from the age of 10. And this was by my step-granddad. And he would do it when I would go around to their house, so my step-granddad and my nan's house. And he would do it when there's people in the room. He would do it when there's nobody in the room. And it was actually an occasion where my stepmom was in the room, sitting opposite him, and I was on his lap, and he put his hand down my pants, and it was my stepmom that saw it. And that's when the family put a lid on it. That's when I wasn't allowed to go around to the house again. I did about 2 years later, because that's when my step-granddad died. And I started to go back around and start seeing my nan again. But then my dad told me to put a lid on it and to not speak about it. Don't go tell your friends. Don't go tell family members. Don't go, just don't speak about it. So then I didn't speak about it. And I lived in silence for what ended up being for 12 years. Now, the main catalyst in me breaking my silence to the world was because my dad had a sudden heart attack in 2017. He was 48 years old, and he had a heart attack, which came, to be honest, I say out the blue, but really it was prone to happen because 3 years prior to that, he became an alcoholic. And then the addiction to alcohol led to his blood pressure going sky high, which then led to him having diabetes. And then 5 months later, he dropped dead. And that really was the straw that broke the camel's back for me to really share my story with the world, because off the back end of that, I found out that me, two other members of the family, as well as my dad, were victims of sexual abuse from the same man. And then it made sense why he became an alcoholic. It made sense why he asked me to put a lid on it, because he was a victim too, living in silence, because he didn't want to confront his story. So if I ever spoke about what happened to me sexual abuse wise, he was a part of that story, right? Because I was basically telling, I was making him confront his own story by me sharing my story. And that's why he asked him to be quiet about it. And now I'm just doing everything possible to get my story out there.
Wow. It's so brave of you, especially being a male, because isn't it true for the majority of men, it's far easier, I feel, for women to share this stuff, because that's what we do. The feminine energy is around, communicating, sharing our stories with our girlfriends. And, that's how we release our emotions and deal with our emotions. Whereas men, they're more in their heads and they're more solitary. They feel it's not, I suppose for some of them, they can perceive it's a weak thing to share emotional stuff like this. So what gave you the strength, or what was that for you made it possible for you to be able to do what you're doing?
Yeah, you're right with that. You're very much right. There is a stigma. Men set upon themselves these expectations to live by, the expectation to be the breadwinner of the house, the expectation to be a rock around their family, not show these emotions because they got to be the, the pilot of the plane, got to be the sailor of the ship. And that was my dad. My dad was a very man's man. He's a very man's man. And him crying, which we hardly ever saw. When he became an alcoholic, we did see that. He would cry all the time. But before that, him crying, like, it wouldn't happen. So him talking about himself being sexually abused for a man like him is basically suicide. That's basically what it is. And I think what gave me the strength to really do it, right, to really sort of speak out there, was I came to this realization that the consequences of living in silence far outweigh the consequences of breaking the silence. My step-granddad, he grew up in an orphanage in Cork in Ireland, and it's a very famous orphanage. And the priests at this Catholic orphanage would chain the boys up. They would rape them, they would hit them, abuse them. And that's how him and his brother grew up in this orphanage. And he lived in silence, my step-granddad. He lived in silence. He never sought help. He didn't admit it. And living in silence for him got to a point where he then inflicted the same pain onto others that was once inflicted onto him. And he became the abuser. So my dad being one of those people. And now my dad grew up in silence. He didn't inflict the pain onto others, but he inflicted the pain onto himself through alcohol abuse, through drug abuse. And I saw this trend. I was like, this is a generational cycle. If I don't heal my wounds, if I don't break my silence, what is there to say that I wouldn't end up like my step-granddad? Like my step-granddad, he didn't come out of school like, right, I'm going to live my life as an abuser now. It happened over a period of time. So I was like, well, I don't want to grow up to be an abuser, and I don't want to abuse others, and I don't want to grow up to abuse myself. So the purpose of breaking that generational cycle and the purpose of speaking out and cutting through these stigmas and these false expectations that men set upon themselves became a very personal journey for me, very personal purpose for me, because it has destroyed males figures in my life, and I didn't want it to be the same thing for me, let alone my kids that I'm fortunate enough to have one day.
Wow, Perry, that's so powerful what you've just mentioned. My hat goes off to you because, like I say, I do recognize, being an expert around having studied relationships and how men's, I suppose, mindsets, behaviors and thoughts differ from women's. I know that must have been huge for you to actually, make those decisions and choices for yourself.
Yeah, they were big decisions. When you're living in silence, you think you're the only person. Well, most people think they're the only person in the world who's gone through it, right? Because they're living in silence. So if they're living in silence, then they're becoming bunk buddies with their inner demons and that internal dialogue. And your inner demons and that internal dialogue is not there to serve you, right? It's there to draw out the worst case scenarios. So if I'm living in silence, I'm like, well, if I tell somebody, they're going to point fingers, they're going to laugh, they're going to think I'm a weirdo, they're not going to believe me, they're going to outcast me. None of them was good. They're going to welcome me. They're going to allow me to find forgiveness and come to this place of self-love. None of those was ever options that came into my head. So, and I remember the first time I broke my silence was to one person, and that was to my girlfriend at the time. And I was fully preparing for her to leave me, like completely prepared for her to walk away because that was the external world that I was seeing. But then when she gave me this response of, she was shocked and she's like, gee, that explains a lot of things, let me help you through this. I'm by your side. I'm your girlfriend for a reason. Then it made me realize, wow, the external world that I've been seeing was literally just a reflection of my internal world, because the actual external world was very beautiful. And it's all about the lens that we see it through, right? And that day was when the lens changed, and then I moved on to sharing it again and again and again and again. Wow,
my hat goes off, as I say, full respect. So, what is the situation regarding your step-granddad now? Has that been formally reported, or what, is he deceased? What's the situation where he's concerned?
He died 2 years after the last sexual abuse happened. So it stopped when I was about 11 and a half.
well done, for speaking out, especially being a role model for men and for wanting to break the silence and the cycle. So for you then, first of all, let the audience know how old you are.
I'm 26. I mean, I've got a baby face. I haven't hit puberty yet. As soon as I do and I get a beard, then I can look a little bit older.
You do have a very young face, I have to say. So and what age was it that you actually spoke? What age was it that you broke that silence?
The very first time to my girlfriend, then I was 21.
So you spent 5 years then building up to, I suppose, being able to speak about it more and more. So can you share with the audience, because this is what I've done with my own story, how that may have negatively impacted, I'm assuming it probably has done at some point, any relationships that you had, whether those were, romantic relationships or otherwise?
And I'm going to take a slightly different angle of this. And it's impacted my relationships in a way where I've been in the past very much addicted to sex, right? I've had a big addiction to sex, and there was never, how can I explain this? There was never any limits or barriers when it came to sexual fantasies and sexual fetishes, and I've had this conversation numerous amount of times with survivors, and it can be a lot. It is really common, because as survivors from childhood sexual abuse, we're introduced to sexual acts and to the world of sex from a very, very early age. And sure, you got one side of the coin where that can really negatively impact somebody, and they don't be with a partner, they don't engage in anything sexual because it triggers them back to then. For me, I was actually the complete opposite. It didn't like harm my relationships with my spouse in that way. Well, negative, yes, it depends on how you want to look at it. Because I was focusing too much on myself because of the addictions that I was having, So
when you talk about addictions, don't spare your punches, because I can always put an adult content related warning on this podcast episode. So, be as frank and as open as what you want to share. But, when you talk about, how that manifested, what did that actually physically look like for you?
With my first relationship, everything to me was about sex in that relationship. And I valued that above our connection, above the love languages that we were communicating, above how she was feeling. That first relationship was a very big learning curve for me, and it made me it switched where it was all about me when it came to sex. Now is nothing like that. Now it's not for me. I get a lot of for me personally, it's about both of us, of course, more about the woman, but back then it was always about me. Something that I've really learned, but I know that stems from that. And another one, for example, and this is I've had this relationship, this conversation with my charity co-founder, Juliet, and what we tend to find, right, is that what happened to us. So, for example, with me, my step granddad used to abuse me a lot when people were in the room, but they didn't know. They didn't know what was happening. So for me, one of my things sexually is having sex when somebody else is in the room. Because of that. See what I mean? Because of that. And I never actually drew any of these links until these conversations started to happen with other survivors, and especially with Juliet, because Juliet was brought up in a foster care home. And in a foster care home was actually a trafficking ring. And she would have to hold down her other friends' children whilst they were getting raped. She would be held down. They were tortured. And she says today, one of her sexual fetishes is to watch people have sex, and she loves it. And she goes, but that's because growing up as a child, that's all she done every day was just watch rape, watch sex. And it's the thing is, either you can know, right, that you get off on that, but then you shy away from it because you don't like that part of yourself, or you can just accept it and then just do it in the right way, if that makes sense, you know? So lots of these things I've learned from the abuse that I've gone through when it comes to relationships and it comes to sexual relationships too.
Because I suppose, yeah, I can relate to that, because how you grow up, you feel like it's normal, don't you? Because you don't know anything else until you sort of become an adult, and you can realize, actually, you know, what I went through wasn't normal at all. But obviously, like you've explained, you know, certain emotions and certain feelings get triggered by the things you see and experience as a child.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, it's about, I know a lot of people, like, for example, somebody else could come into my shoes and be like, okay, well, I know having sexual intercourse in a room with somebody else, whether they pretending they're not knowing, so it's kind of like a role play, or they're just watching, I know that turns me on, but I'm not going to venture down that path or even let anybody know that turns me on, because that is admitting and me confronting the abuse that I went through. But I think I'm very much aware of it and accept of it, because I've healed those wounds. I've found complete forgiveness, and therefore it doesn't create this negative chain between what I'm into and but I'm into that because I grew up experiencing that, you know.
So how did your step granddad get away with doing it while people were in the room? How did that work in terms of you know, people not noticing what was going on?
Because a lot of the times I would sit on his lap. I'll sit on his lap and we would watch TV. And sometimes people just didn't see. Like when it was that scenario, when I was on his lap, he would have his hand down my pants and he'd be playing with me, and he might be breathing in my ear, or he would just be doing something within that realm. And sometimes people just didn't see. And I think they just didn't see because he would be very sly. He wouldn't be very quick moving his hands, you know. And there may be like a blanket there or something. And that's the last thing you would expect when you're in the room. Like, you know, if a family member wouldn't expect anything like that, so they wouldn't even think anything of it. But it's because the last time it happened, my stepmom was sitting directly in front of us, and we had no blanket or anything. And I don't know what made my step-granddad think he would get away with it. But I think the temptation just grew too strong for him, where the consequences or the fact that he may be caught was not even on his conscience, right? So he just went forward and done it, and my stepmom saw it like painstakingly clear what was going on.
Wow. Okay, so were you aware at that age that it wasn't right, or did you just think it was just normal part and parcel of affection?
Yeah, the latter. So I didn't. The extent of it was I knew it was a bit odd. That's it. Like, you know, I knew it was a bit odd because, like, I remember this one time my granddad was playing with me, and I looked up and we just did a shh. He just put his finger in front of his mouth and just gave me a shushing sound, but not in a creepy way. Like, it was just a, come on, mate, this is our secret. No, you know, type of thing. And I thought odd, but that was the extent of it. I think it was just he just expressing love to me in a way that another family member wasn't. And that's just what I lived with.
So was it only when he was caught by your step grandma then that you realised that actually what you've been experiencing wasn't the norm?
Well, no, not even then. So my stepmom caught it. She took me home. Then she told my dad, and then they stopped me going around there. And then, like, my dad said you can't go around there anymore. And it wasn't even at that point where I was like, oh, okay, so that must have been really bad then, what he was doing. I was annoyed. So I still didn't truly understand what was happening, you know, and I lacked the emotional maturity to understand. It wasn't on the news. It wasn't in the papers. I didn't really know what was going on. It wasn't until the years went on. I had a school counselor, therapist, and it started to become more apparent in the news and in the media. When I was like 16, 17 years old is when I confronted that story, and then I truly understood the weight of it.
Okay. And what effect and impact did that have on you? Did it create any sort of anger issues or anything like that around it?
I definitely was not able to control my emotions anger wise. I was never an abusive, like I've never, you know, been in fights or anything like that, but I would shout, you know, I would lose my temper, and I never knew coming from, like, why my dog chewing up my headphones, why would that, to the average person, like, you know, they would lose their shit if that happened, and I did. But then I remember once when I completely lost it with my dog, and I was shouting, like, then my dog got scared because they're sensitive because I shouted because she chewed up my AirPods. And then I realized in that moment, I was like, hold on a second, why am I shouting? Why am I getting so emotional about her chewing up my AirPods? Sure, but I can go and buy another one. She doesn't know. I'm to blame because I shouldn't have put the AirPods down below where she can grab it. So then I really was trying to, try to understand and gain this awareness as to why I was having those emotional outbursts. And I think it just, over time, it just grew and grew and grew and grew. The fact that I couldn't have this control over my emotions, and it just grew. And then there was like a dark point where I was very suicidal. I remember going out into my car garage, and I remember looking up at the beams of the garage, the wooden beams. And I just remember, I remember going out, but I don't remember standing there for 5 minutes until I realized I've been standing for literally 5 minutes, imagining myself hanging from that beam. And it was because I was in this like huge financial debt. So I was trying to build a business, but my ego was too high to not go and get a job. So it's just like these things over years just stacking. And because my ego was too high, even at that point, to go and get a therapist, I didn't know how to handle any of this. So it did impact me a lot in a big way in regards to mental health, for sure.
What was the catalyst for change? I mean, and where did that advice come from? Did it come from yourself, or did it come from a third party? Who helped you heal and get over this? In other words,
it was when about a few months after my dad passed away, and the Mask of Masculinity by Lewis Howes, that book came out, and he talked about these masks that men wear. The alpha mask and the mask that you wear around women, and the athlete mask, and it made me realize that is exactly what I've been doing. It made me realize that was what my dad was doing, and it was this realization, right, about these masks. And I'm very much a person who acts within a moment once he's realized something. So because I realized about these masks, I made a decision that day to tear down those masks, and that's when then I told my girlfriend at the time. But it was more of it just got to the end where I just had enough of living in silence. I had enough of not being able to control my emotions. I had enough of asking questions without any answers. And I just needed to go down a path that I was scared to go down. But I was like, what's the worst that can happen? Because it can't be any worse than what's going on right now.
So did you gain help through self-help vehicles, or did you use a therapist? What methods did you use to get support and help to heal this?
In my adult years, self-help. I've just moved location. I've moved to Guildford now, so I'm on a search for a therapist, because I believe that every person on the planet should have a therapist. You don't need to have problems to have a therapist, nothing like that. The stigma, I mean, that's a different conversation, but I think the stigma around therapy needs to be taken away. But in my adult years, it was all self-help, and I've had a mentor. I've had a personal mentor since the age of 21. And he's like a best friend, and he is a mentor. He's many steps ahead of me. So he's somebody that I always go to on a daily basis if I have a question or I have a problem. But definitely self-help. And what's really started the healing journey massively was when a friend of mine whose dad passed away said that he got through that through forgiveness. And he urged me to find forgiveness with my dad's death. So that was a path that I went on. Then once I went on that path, I then made sure to bring the act of forgiveness into the abuse and forgive my step-granddad.
It's a big thing, isn't it? I mean, a lot of people think, their automatic reaction around forgiveness is how can you forgive that? But it's not about forgiving them for their sake. It's about forgiving them for your own sake, isn't it? And not allowing them to now have any power to negatively impact your life going forward.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a strong believer in forgiveness. I also the overriding theme in my book is forgiveness. But I know there's never once in that book I say to somebody, you need to find forgiveness, because everybody has their own story. Everybody's at different stages in their story. And all I urge is that everybody understands and acknowledges that forgiveness is an option. Because you're right, forgiveness is not about giving them a get out of jail free card. It's not about letting them off the hook. They're not in the picture. It's got nothing to do with them. It's about you, because you're too courageous, beautiful, and powerful as a human being to still be held back by the chains of the abuser. My step-granddad died when I was 14 years old, and he still had a hold on me. He's 6 feet in the ground. How has he still got a hold on me? Sure, I can forgive myself from not speaking out. I can forgive myself, right? But that's great. I've forgiven myself. And then what happens when I meet a member of his family? What happens when I see a picture of him? I'm negative emotions are going to stir up inside of me because I haven't found forgiveness, and I wasn't having that. So asking questions and gaining awareness on his story, and only then was when I found out about the orphanage that he grew up in and about the abuse that he faced. But I never would have found that out though if I never found forgiveness and never be able to move forward.
So what for you, just to share with the audience, for any listeners that can relate to this story or similar growing up and have not actually dealt with the subject of forgiveness, what could you offer as a powerful exercise that they could implement to start that process?
Well, starting off on forgiveness for you, the person in the mirror, right? That's where you're starting off. So it's about finding forgiveness towards yourself first. Now, for me, how I was able to do that was about first acknowledging. So here's the thing around forgiveness, right? There'll be certain elements of that particular story that you have not forgiven yourself for. So for example, I was abused for a year and a half. I didn't speak out. So that's one point in the story that I never forgave myself for. So it's about acknowledging that fact that I never spoken out, right? And then being like, okay, I never spoke out. But why? Okay, well, I never spoke out because I was manipulated and groomed by somebody. He made me feel like it was okay. Okay, so I wasn't actually to blame then, right? Because I was under the spell of somebody else. So I am not to blame for that happening. So I've acknowledged it, and I'm like, right, Perry, you need to forgive yourself for that, right? You need to detach yourself, because Buddha once said that the root of all evil is an attachment. So detach yourself from that and then let it go. Acknowledge. What's the answer? Let it go. And then I would do that constantly around every single point within my story that I never forgave myself for. And because then, here's the thing, because then you have the awareness around everything, right? You've brought everything up into the open. You've put it out to the universe. And then if you are comfortable in doing so, I want to say this, if you're comfortable in doing so, well, I won't say comfortable because you won't be comfortable doing it. But if you will at least allow yourself to give it a try, do the same thing for the abuser, right? And every abuser has their own story. Again, it's not about letting them off the hook, right? For me, I knew that my stepdad must have had a story. Nobody's born a racist. You're not born an alcoholic. You're not born wanting to rape kids. It's something that happens because wounds are still open and haven't healed, and becomes a coping mechanism, right? It becomes a way of living, a way of life for that particular person. So they have a story. So if I can try to, if you can try to somehow maybe ask questions to the right people, or it depends on your story, sitting down with the abuser. Like if my step-granddad was alive today, I would have sat down with him already. I would have asked for him to tell me his story. And I probably would have, I would have put him in my book. I would have had him in Breaking the Silence book, because I think it's very important for the healing process to see it from both sides, because it does allow you to gain more clarity on what happened and be able to move forward.
And I even got to the point where I could feel some compassion. I know it's going to be, shocking for some people to hear that, but, knowing that your perpetrator or abuser has probably a similar, probably even worse story than what you have. It doesn't condone their behavior, obviously, but, at least you can probably empathize and maybe have some compassion, because their only outlet for them at that point, was to repeat that cycle, unfortunately for them. But it doesn't have to be the case for yourself, does it? No.
And an example to link this to is if we look at, and I've got many friends who's taken this path, and it's the same path to take. So I've got many friends who have been in relationships, right? So if we take for example, just complete example here. If we take a female male, and over a period of time the male was abusive, right? Now let's switch this for some people who might be like, oh, why does it have to be the woman? Let's take a male who dates a woman, and the woman is maybe manipulative for a number amount of years, or maybe she cheats on him. He finds out 3 years into a relationship, right? And then they break up. Now, what path is that male? What path can that male take? That man can be like, oh, you know, I can't believe she fucking treated me like that. You know, like to hell with her, right? Type of thing, you know. And then you have the other path, which is like, listen, you've obviously got a lot of pain. You know, why you was manipulating me? You've obviously got a lot of pain. I don't know if that's mommy or daddy issues. I don't know if that was because of relationships that you've experienced yourself. And whilst I don't necessarily condone how you treated me, I just want to say that I forgive you, and I really hope that you're able to heal your wounds, and the next partner that you're with, you can find true happiness with. Now, what position is more powerful? That's the latter, right? Because that male, because he's not saying he's forgiven her, but that's the same thing about the abuse. You know, it's the same stance that you can take within your story of abuse, because the first option, when you're living in that world of hate, screw her, I hope she gets cheated on, I hope somebody manipulates her because she done that to me. Not progressing in life, you're not getting anywhere by coming from that standpoint, right? Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book, The Body Keeps the Score, right? The book, The Body Keeps the Score, is a fantastic book, and it's about how the trauma that we experience manifests within us and comes out in our mannerisms. It comes out in the way we act in life and our decisions that we make, and it's the same thing there. Okay
then, Perry, thank you so much for sharing all of that and for giving your advice and tips on how we can start that forgiveness process. Perry has written his book. The book is called Breaking the Silence by Perry Power, for those that would be interested in finding out more about Perry and reading his story in full. So thank you very much for that, Perry. How can our listeners get in touch with you if they want to get in touch?
Sure. So you can get in touch with me on Instagram. My handle is I am Perry Power. And then for the book, whoever does purchase a copy of the book on Amazon, all the profits from the book goes to our charity. So just wanted to highlight that.
And what's the charity called?
Our charity is called We Rescue Kids. So at the moment, we've got a campaign where you can sponsor a child. And if you sponsor a child, you're sponsoring them to get monthly therapy with a child therapist. And that's where the profits go into. Excellent.
Brilliant. I really love it. And it's a lovely way to contribute back and pay it forward, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for having me on then.
You're very welcome. So listeners, it just leaves me to say that true love starts with opening our hearts. And until next time, goodbye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Hearts Entwined podcast. You can follow Lyn via the Facebook group Two Hearts Entwined, or search Lyn Smith, inspirational speaker, at LinkedIn, or email lyn@hearts-entwined.com. That's LYN@hearts-entwined.com. Remember, true love starts with opening our hearts.